just by way of introduction, I'm Eric Chiu. I helped start a company called HyTrust, and we're focused on cloud security and helping government agencies, some of the largest commercial organizations and federal organizations achieve compliance and ensure security for their cloud environments. And when we think of cloud, we really think of it as workloads that are running in infrastructure as a service environment. So on technologies like VMware, Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure. So just a show of hands here, how many of you have your own private cloud running, say, a VMware infrastructure? About 4. And how many of you are running in a public cloud, say Amazon, AWS, or Microsoft Azure? Great. I saw a couple overlaps there. Fantastic. So, the focus of the discussion we're going to have today is around how do you achieve compliance and ensure that you're secure in the cloud, and what do you have to think about more from a bottoms-up perspective, and especially in always the competing world, right? We have to make sure that we meet all these requirements, but at the same time, we're all trying to make do with less, right? And make sure that we're utilizing our precious resources efficiently. So when we think about state and local governments and agencies, we see that data privacy regulations and security requirements are ever growing. And so you see a few of them listed here. Everything from HIPAA, right, for healthcare privacy information, to GDPR for general data protection regulation now enforced by the European Union. PCI, which governs any financial information that you may hold on behalf of individuals, right, customers. CJIS, right, the criminal justice information security regulation and requirements. We're hearing more and more organizations care about things like NIST 800-171, as well as, of course, breach notifications. And then you have other kind of national, federal requirements like FedRAMP and, NIST 800-53, et cetera, et cetera. Are any of you subject to any of the compliance regulations that I have listed on this slide? If so, great. At least a few of you. So we hear that a lot of the state and local agencies care about this because they have auditors more and more on site, ensuring that they meet one or more of these guidelines, right? And at the same time, data center compliance is a hard business. You have everything from traditional host, server, network security tools that that have been around, right? There are lots of them. They're hard to manage, et cetera. But probably more importantly, they're not tailor-made for cloud, and so they don't address the unique challenges that cloud has. You have areas like organizations that continue to have change among their employees or vendors, right, and their organizational departments. IT compliance is becoming more and more granular and stringent, and some of it is from those various compliance frameworks that are requiring very specific prescriptive controls over the different systems. And then continuous compliance promises, easier and faster remediation, but then it's another bulk of work to actually implement a new set of tools that you have to think about. And then, in the end, the mandated requirements for things like, regulatory compliance are really just a bare minimum. If you say, am I compliant? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure. Right? It just means that you've met that set of guidelines according to an auditor over a set of data and systems that they care about, right? It doesn't mean are you free from being hacked and attacked, right? And your information stolen. or somebody being able to do inappropriate commands or malicious acts on your system, right? But then if you think about it from the standpoint of the cloud, right, you now have, for those of you who are running a VMware infrastructure, you're now running all of those, servers and applications and systems on top of a new virtual infrastructure. So your servers that you were thinking about before are now virtual machines. They're software. They don't actually live as a physical instance anymore. They're just a set of files that can be moved around and instantiated on the fly, right? And that you could be running on premises, on VMware, you can be running in Amazon and Azure. And those platforms really are meant to give greater agility to the organization. But at the same time, you have a number of challenges, right? So, do the departments and agencies have the right skills and expertise around cloud to deploy and manage the cloud effectively? The second is, without that dedicated cloud staff, right? Do those agencies have the right talent, and then is there a deeper and steeper learning curve, especially around things like how do I achieve security in those environments? As we talked about earlier, those traditional physical host, server, network tools, they don't translate well to cloud infrastructure, right? For example, your semantic endpoint products are not aware at all that they're running as a virtual machine on a virtual infrastructure platform or in a public cloud. All they see is the Windows and Linux system that they deploy on, right? The fourth is that cloud platforms, whoever it is that you're leveraging, they really just focus on performance and operability, right? They want to make it easier for companies to use their products. They're not necessarily designing their products to ensure that you meet compliance, to make sure that you are as secure as possible, right? A couple examples of this are we service some of the biggest banks, from Bank of America and Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase, but Citigroup at one point did their own kill chain analysis when they had an admin event happen where an admin did something wrong. So they cataloged all of their administrators across the entire bank, networking, storage, virtualization, et cetera. And they determined all the different operations that that person, those set of admins could do, right, based on their role. And they determined that the cloud or virtualization admin was the most dangerous at the bank. And the reason why that virtualization admin was the most dangerous was that person could make a copy of any virtual machine. A virtual machine, again, is a set of files. It's no longer a physical system. And they could walk off with that virtual machine on their laptop without ever being detected. But more importantly, that virtualization admin could delete any virtual machine on the network or write a script that deleted every single virtual machine across the entire bank. That power to delete every virtual machine, which means every x86 Windows and Linux system across the entire bank, was a risk that Citi could not, right, have within their environment. And so we're a strategic supplier to a lot of those big banks, right? So if you think about it from the standpoint of the cloud platforms that we talk about, well, they just want to make it easy. They want to make it easy for a customer, a commercial organization, or a government agency to be able to deploy systems quickly. They also want to make it easy for somebody to be able to delete things quickly. Make it API driven so they can delete everything quickly in an automated way, right? But at the same time, that also means that from a security perspective, you have to think about the risks associated with, right, that level of power within your organization. And that really highlights the last point, right? These cloud platforms really lack the maturity around the security controls and the compliance requirements that are, that each of you are subject to, right? And then, one point that's not on this slide, which I think every one of our customers is now realizing, is that everyone is going towards a multi-cloud architecture. So they may have systems that run on premises on, say, a VMware infrastructure, but almost all of them are also using AWS or Azure as well. So how do you ensure compliance across a multi-cloud world when each of these systems themselves lack the maturity, right, around security controls? Then those security controls are not interchangeable across those different cloud platforms, right? So, third parties are really where most organizations are going to think about how to do that. If you think about all the items we just talked about, right? Everything from, cloud is really the platform of choice where every organization's moving, right, for agility. And at the same time, data security regulations are becoming greater, right? Most of the organizations that we surveyed, this is a recent survey we did at a conference, which was VMworld, where we asked them, do you believe that your compliance requirements are going to be the same or growing in the future? And at least 71% said that they believe that was going to be at least as great or more, as the time went by, right? And so it's really driven by all of the dynamics that we're talking about, right? Greater security and compliance requirements that organizations are subject to, as well as all of these different transformations that are happening in the data center. So why is cloud compliance so difficult? Well, so we're thinking about kind of each of these modules here. One is that each platform provider uses a different set of nomenclatures, different shared responsibility model, different deployment and implementation standards, right? These are entirely different technology stacks that you're building your systems on. The second is the dynamic nature of cloud, right, challenges a lot of organizations that have been subject to compliance but with fairly static physical systems. If you have virtual machines that are being deployed and being moved around dynamically, well, your need to ensure that compliance on those systems becomes a very different challenge. It's difficult to perform a risk assessment given all of these different technologies, right? You might have a virtual infrastructure or a public cloud platform. You might also be running virtualized storage, virtualized networking. How do you run a risk assessment on that new technology stack? And by the way, most of the compliance regulations now actually have the hypervisor as being subject to compliance. PCI is very prescriptive in that. NIST controls are very prescriptive in making sure that the hypervisor, the virtual infrastructure, is subject to all these requirements as well. There's also very little visibility into the cloud infrastructure. All of the SIM products were really designed from that static standpoint, right, with traditional security tools, and they lack the visibility of what's happening in that cloud infrastructure. It's difficult to control and maintain and enforce sensitive data protection, right, and data privacy across these cloud platforms. And there's ambiguity about what to audit, right? Where, which parts of that stack do you have to audit and ensure compliance of, right? And then you think about all the different, products and requirements, and at the same time, everybody's being asked to do more with less. So how do you make all this work, right? So we have a set of requirements here from 800-171. Everything from access control to audit and accountability, configuration management, identification and authentication, incident response, right? Personnel security, risk assessment, security assessment, et cetera. So how do you do that and manage all of the different tools that are there to address each of those individual items, right? On all of the different infrastructure stack pieces. The Windows operating system, the application tier, you know, the cloud platform, your network, right, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff to deal with and to manage, right? But at the same time, I think one of the things that we should all keep in mind is you don't want to boil the ocean. For those of us who have, you know, constrained resources, you want to make sure that you know, whatever you're embarking on is achievable. And it's achievable within the budget, right, and resources that you have. And one way you can do that is by scoping down, right? And you know, one of the things that we talk to a lot of customers about is, you know, first, find where your sensitive, your compliant regulated data, right? Where is it? So once you've identified where is your data, well then you can do things like encrypt it. Make sure that anything that has you know, personal health information or personal identification information, make sure that that data can be identified, then make sure it's encrypted, right, it's protected. Then you can segment. With cloud, one of the great things is, you know, everything is dynamic, but also everything is configurable too. You can segment that sensitive data and those workloads that run that sensitive data into their own zone, right? And you can make sure that you create a boundary, and then you you impose all the access controls and you know, auditing and hardening for those systems in that boundary. But you don't need to necessarily do it to all systems, right? For a university, for example, you may be running a ton of research applications on a bunch of systems. Maybe a lot of those are not subject to compliance. You know, maybe they are if they're handling sensitive, you know, government information, et cetera. But so you can maybe scope those out for the most part. But what you care about, if your university, might be your HR systems, your student health records, right? All that kind of stuff that, one, you need to make sure you secure that data, you encrypt it. Two, you need to make sure that you segment it and you have the right access controls, right? The right hardening, the right visibility over administrative actions, all of those things. But you don't need to do it necessarily on every university workload. You just need to do it on the stuff that has you know, compliance requirements wrapped around it. Would that be correct? Great. And so I think each of you, I'd love to you know, think about other use cases that maybe some of you have, where you can think about certain data, right, that needs to be secured and segmented off from maybe everything else that might be running in your environment. You know, maybe it's you know, the healthcare organizations for the state, or it's things like CalPERS or things like that. Maybe we can, you know, first scope down that environment and then ensure that you have the right controls and the right auditing to meet those compliance and those security requirements. And that's really all I had on content. And this is just a little bit about us, right? And why you know, we're up here is that, you know, we service a lot of organizations, right? Some of the leading commercial organizations, some of the leading state and local agencies, as well as government agencies. And we help them with all of these issues. How do we make sure that the workloads that they're running in the cloud are secure? How do we make sure that somebody can't destroy the entire infrastructure? Or how do we make sure that they can continue to meet compliance regulations in their environment? Any questions that any of you have? I mean, we think I noticed a few of you are running VMware Virtual Infrastructure and Amazon Public Cloud. Do you have similar compliance requirements that you need to meet here that are subject to things like 171 or FedRAMP or some of the other compliance regulations? Nope. Well, if that's the case, we can all go grab a drink. Fernando is here. He runs our sales efforts for SLED, and he can answer any questions about other agencies that are running HyTrust and how they're using us, and would love to grab a drink with all you guys outside.